Hi there, my name is Justin Hibbard. Welcome to Politics in Plain English. Thanks for tuning in. Today's question is, why are gas prices so high? Before I get to that question, if you're new to Politics in Plain English, what I do is take complex political ideas and current events and break them down so they're easy to understand and digest in an explanation that's about 18 minutes or less. I take out the hyper emotion and spin and try to stick with data and facts, presenting all sides fairly. My goal is that you become an informed voter because I believe an informed voter is the most powerful voter and the ideal of our democracy. Now, it's been a while since I've done a Politics in Plain English podcast, but my goal is moving forward to do at least just one episode each month. If you haven't done so, would you do me a huge favor and subscribe? You can subscribe to the Politics in Plain English podcast wherever you get your podcasts. I also do a video of these podcasts, which you can find on my YouTube channel, which is Justin R. Hibbard. And that's my handle as well on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Justin R. Hibbard and you can follow me there as well. Now, let's get back to the question at hand. Why are gas prices so high? A lot of people seem to think that the president controls gas prices. This isn't quite true. Things the president does, like go to war, might cause gas prices to fluctuate, but it's not like the president sets the price of oil. Oil is an internationally traded commodity. Think of it like a particular stock in the stock market. The price is based on what's available and how much people want of it. In other words, the price of oil is pretty much like everything else, is based on the law of supply and demand. Now, we can't talk about gas prices without talking about what's happening in Ukraine. A week and a half ago, at the time of this recording, Vladimir Putin ordered the Russian military to attack Ukraine in what essentially could become World War III. European American forces are hesitant to go to war with Russia because Russia has nuclear weapons and because nobody wants to escalate this to World War III. So instead, countries have provided weapons to Ukraine's military, hoping they can fight Russia on their own. However, Europe and North America have waged a war in another manner. They've waged an economic war against Russia through some of the harshest sanctions in history. Basically, when the US places sanctions on a country or a company or an individual, it makes that entity kind of cursed. No one wants to do business with them because they also might get sanctioned by the US. One of the ways the US has sanctioned Russia is through the banking industry, cutting off Russia's access to foreign bank accounts and the ability to borrow foreign money. In a matter of days, Russia's currency, the ruble, lost nearly 1/3 of its value. So imagine trying to buy a house in another country for, let's just say, $300,000. You've got your money saved, and suddenly a war happens, and now your money can't buy that $300,000 house because your money is now only worth $200,000 in that foreign country. This is how sanctions are affecting the Russian economy. However, Russia does have a wild card, and that is its oil. Russia makes about 11 million barrels of oil each day, and each day it exports about 8 million of those barrels. It is the second largest oil exporter. The world consumes about 92 million barrels a day. That means that about 12% of the oil that the world consumes is oil from Russia. Some places consume more of Russian oil than others. For example, in the US, our share is only about 3% of Russian oil. However, in Europe, that number is closer to 40%. That's because Russia can easily get that oil into Europe through the Black Sea, as well as various pipelines, whereas that oil would have to travel a lot further to get to the United States. Here's the other thing. There's an international agreement called the petrodollar. Basically states that oil has to be purchased in US dollars. So even though the international community is trying to cut off Russia's access to foreign currency, which is causing the ruble to deflate in value, Russia is still getting US dollars through the sale of its oil. If oil were $100 per barrel, Russia would get 800 million US dollars each day for its exports. So as the price of oil increases, an increase of US dollars flow into oil exporting countries like Russia. Up until today, the US and Europe haven't sanctioned Russia's oil supply. Why is that? Well, it's the law of supply and demand. What would happen if you immediately cut off 12% of the world's oil supply? You'd have significantly more demand, but significantly less supply. And that would cause the price of gas to skyrocket. Citizens would lose their minds. So in order to not totally screw over their own countries and their own citizens, the US and Europe have withheld sanctioning Russia's oil. However, it appears the US is moving towards taking the extraordinary step of sanctioning Russian oil. However, something else has happened in the meantime, even without oil sanctions. Countries and private companies around the world have started self-boycotting Russian oil. In the UK, dock workers refuse to unload Russian oil from a non-Russian ship. Oil companies like BP and Exxon pulled out of Russia, joining a plethora of non-oil companies like Apple, IKEA, and Boeing, indefinitely suspending future business there. It may be because of the high risk of doing business in Russia under Putin's regime, and it may be out of moral solidarity with Ukraine. It's likely a little bit of both. Because countries and companies are reluctant to touch Russian oil, this is creating more demand for non-Russian oil. And because there's more demand and less supply of oil, then it's causing the price of oil to go up. And up it's gone. In fact, just recently it reached over $115 per barrel. That's the highest it's been since June 2008, when the price of oil soared to $140 per barrel. Just as a comparison, at the start of the pandemic in May 2020, the price of oil plummeted to $18 per barrel. Some of that was due to people sheltering at home and using less gas, but really it was due to Saudi Arabia targeting Russia's big refineries by flooding the market with oil, creating much more supply in a time of low demand. And as a way of trying to protect the price of oil, the Trump administration worked with Mexico and OPEC to slash the amount of oil production, causing the prices to raise back up. So here Russia has all this oil, and more companies and countries are reluctant to touch it. So what does Russia do? It does the same thing a grocery store does when it has too much of a particular product. It created a clearance sale. Russia slashed its prices. And as it began lowering its price point 20 to 30%, it got the attention of countries like India and companies like Shell, which finally were like, we have moral standards, but gee, look how cheap that gas is. Here's a universal truth. Nothing gets in the way of someone's moral standards more than money. Ukraine's foreign minister called this out and criticized Shell in a tweet, saying, I am told Shell discreetly bought some Russian oil yesterday. One question to Shell, doesn't Russian oil smell of Ukrainian blood for you? Now, mind you, Shell didn't break any laws or violate sanctions in purchasing Russia's oil at that time. They just did something that the world found to be morally unconscionable. Shortly afterward, Shell published a statement saying, we didn't take this decision lightly, and we understand the strength of feeling around it. They continued to say that they would donate the profits of it to various Ukrainian relief funds. While we see an outpouring of support for Ukraine, how much are people willing to support Russian sanctions with their own wallets? People lose their minds when they pay a few cents more for gas, and now we're paying a lot more than just a few cents, and it has a lot to do with boycotting Russian oil. Whenever the price of oil goes up $10 per barrel, the price of gas goes up an average of 25 cents per gallon. Analysts think that oil could reach as much as $130 per barrel, so we still could see the price of oil go up another 35 to 50 cents per gallon. Now, if you think you pay a lot for gas, consider that people in the Netherlands and Norway are paying close to $8 for a gallon of gas, while people in Hong Kong are paying over $10 a gallon. Here's another universal truth. High gas prices are a political liability. I mentioned earlier that the president doesn't control gas prices. However, people don't realize that, and so politicians scramble to try and do whatever they can when the price of oil goes up. In an election year, which we are in, a midterm election year, all a candidate needs to do is promise to lower the price of gas, even though they can't, and he or she can easily unseat an incumbent. At the State of the Union address on March 1st, President Biden said that the U.S. was releasing 30 million barrels of oil from its reserves in order to help offset the cost of gas. In other words, the goal is to flood the market with supply in order to dilute the cost of the commodity. However, In the US, we consume about 20 million barrels of oil per day. So releasing 30 million barrels is definitely a short-term solution and likely won't affect the price of oil or gas too much. So what else could the government do to decrease the pain at the pump? One strategy would be to temporarily halt taxes on gas. The federal government taxes gasoline at 18 cents per gallon, and states add on an additional tax. In California, where gas is notoriously expensive, the state adds 51 cents per gallon of tax to the price of gasoline. Another strategy is to decrease the amount of oil that the U.S. exports, or create an additional supply for U.S. citizens. For example, in many countries that produce a significant amount of oil, the cost of oil is incredibly cheap for its own citizens. For example, Venezuela produces about 3.5 million barrels of oil per day, and its citizens pay less than 10 cents for a gallon of gas. Kuwait produces a little over 3 million gallons of oil each day, and its citizens are currently paying around $1.30 for a gallon of gas. Doesn't it seem nice? Did you know that the U.S. is the world's largest oil producer of all varieties at over 19 million barrels of oil per day? But we are also the world's largest multi-variety oil consumer at over 20 million barrels per day. And we export about 6% of our oil supply. The more we export, the less supply we have in the U.S., and the more we have to import, which raises production costs for oil. However, it's important to keep in mind that we have a free market economy here, which means government doesn't control oil. Oil companies control oil. However, the U.S. government could cap the amount of oil exports or create additional incentives to provide oil for the U.S. However, the most impactful measure we can take on the price of oil is to limit our demand through practical measures. Motor gasoline accounts for the highest use of oil in the United States, accounting for 44% of our total oil consumption. To help reduce the amount of oil we use, businesses could offer work from home options, people could carpool, people could take one less trip to the store, and when it comes time to buy a car, we can choose to buy a more fuel-efficient vehicle like a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, or even an electric vehicle. Ultimately, the less time you're filling up at the pump, the less pain you will feel from rising gas costs. I know that's not the answer everyone wants to hear, but it is the truth. Thanks for taking the time to listen to Politics in Plain English. If you like what you heard, could you do me a huge favor and subscribe and give it a 5-star rating? You can find Politics in Plain English on your favorite podcast provider. The video version is on my YouTube channel, Justin R. Hibbard, and you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. It's the same handle, Justin R. Hibbard. And lastly, I'll try and do a podcast and vodcast once each month, but I do a lot more writing than I do recording. You can subscribe and get my latest article in your inbox at justinrhibbard.substack.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Justin Hibbard, and this has been Politics in Plain English.